my blissful selves. Today, let us know briefly about meditation. What is meditation? Meditation means to remember upon. So, all living beings on the earth desire for permanent happiness. So, remembering a permanent happiness is meditation. So, whatever we remember, we will have the knowledge of it. And if we remember happiness, we will have the knowledge of happiness. So, remembering happiness is meditation. So, since our birth, we have been enjoying the sensory objects till now. But even then, we have not got the permanent happiness. The happiness is in our Atman, but we are seeking it in sensory objects. How it is possible to experience permanent happiness from sensory objects? In deep sleep, there is happiness. But whose happiness it is in a deep sleep, where we know whether there is anybody or not. We know whether we know anything or not. We know whether there is happiness or not. That means we know all these. That means we are the knower. I am the knower. I am the knower of knowing anybody is there or not, of knowing anything or not, knowing happiness or not. That means I am the knower. And in deep sleep, there is nothing except me. I am only there in the deep sleep. There are no sensory objects. There is no body. There is no body consciousness. But there is bliss. And if that is the case, whose bliss it is? Only I am there in deep sleep. And there is bliss. And there is nothing else other than myself. So, during sleep, the bliss that we experience is of my own self. This clearly indicates that the bliss is there in the Atman, but not in sensory objects. So, remembering my Atman or the self is meditation, but we are knowing now we are remembering the sensory objects only. Why we are remembering sensory objects? Because we think that the sensory objects are givers of bliss. And if we remember the sensory objects, till we think that there is happiness in sensory objects. But when we firmly know or understand that there is no bliss in sensory objects, then only we can stop remembering sensory objects. So, if there is no bliss in sensory objects, where it is, the bliss is in the Atman. When we know that the bliss is in the Atman firmly, then we will remember the Atman. Then only we can meditate the Atman. For example, if we enjoy the forms of TV for longer duration, there will be burning sensation in our eyes. And later, there will be eye disease. And by seeing the forms in the TV, the mind will be tired. And there remains the desire to enjoy the sensory objects or the forms in the TV. That means by enjoying the sensory objects leads to bodily tiresomeness and bodily disease, and mental tiresomeness and mental disease. Mental disease means the desire to enjoy the sensory objects. So, this clearly indicates that there is no bliss in sensory objects. But during the enjoyment of sensory objects, we experience the bliss, whose it is. We think that some sensory objects are givers of happiness, and the others are givers of misery. So we desire the sensory objects which we think that they are givers of happiness. So we desire the sensory objects of our own choice. So I want sweet, I want sweet. Then our mind will be agitated or become chanchala, and the misery is experienced. And when the sensory object of our desire has been got, our mind becomes calm. And in our calm mind, the bliss of our Atman only experienced. But we wrongly think that the happiness is there in the sensory objects. Then we go on enjoying the sensory object, and that enjoyment leads to tiresomeness and weariness. So it clearly indicates that there is no happiness in sensory objects, but the happiness is there in the Atman. So we know that in a deep sleep there is bliss. But the bliss that is experienced is temporary. The bliss that is experienced in deep sleep is temporary. And it lasts till the deep sleep is there. But when we awake from deep sleep and come to the empirical state, waking state, again the misery begins. But we don't want temporary happiness. We want a permanent happiness. But the bliss that has been experienced in a deep sleep by forgetfulness. The cause of unhappiness is due to the desire of sensory objects. When the desires of sensory objects are there, our mind becomes agitated and unhappiness is experienced. And the other cause of unhappiness is gross body. My gross body has to remain for a longer duration so that I will be in a position to experience permanent happiness like that. And one more cause for unhappiness is body consciousness. So we give up the desire of sensory objects, the desire of gross body, and the gross body consciousness forgetfully in a deep sleep. Until then, the forgetfulness remains, so there will be happiness. But when we come to the waking, again, the desires of sensory objects, the desire of gross body, and the body consciousness will be there. And these will be in a position to give us unhappiness. So, if at all we have to experience permanent happiness, we have to give up all these. That is, the desire of sensory objects, the desire of our gross body, and the body consciousness consciously. And we have to have the self consciousness or the atmic consciousness consciously. Then only we will be in a position to experience permanent happiness like that. And if that is the case, how we have to give up the body consciousness? So, in waking or when we are living, so we talk. But when we die, we don't talk. Why? That means we are the talking entity. When we die, the talking entity leaves the gross body, and only the gross body remains behind. That means this clearly indicates that we are the talking entity. We are talkers. And if at all we have to talk anything, we have to have the consciousness. So this clearly indicates that our real nature is consciousness. Our real nature is Atman, the self. And by this, we can conquer or we can give up the gross body consciousness consciously or knowingly. That means we are the knowing, talking entity. Our nature is consciousness. Our nature is Atman. Then what we have to do is we have to remain as consciousness, consciously. If we remain as consciousness, consciously, then we will experience permanent happiness. And if we have to experience permanent happiness, we have to meditate it constantly. If we meditate as I am consciousness for longer duration, we will have the self knowledge like this. If at all we have to experience permanent happiness, We have to give up the desire of sensory objects knowingly and permanently. We have to give up the desire of gross body knowingly, permanently. And we have to give up the gross body consciousness knowingly and permanently. And later, to experience permanent happiness, we have to remain as consciousness. So we have to remain as consciousness, consciously at a Brahmi Muhurta, then in the morning, then at noon, then in the evening, and lastly in the midnight. So this has to be done because we have to be conscious about our conscious nature. So in the morning, the ozone content in the atmosphere is to the maximum extent. This ozone supplies half food to the body. Generally, it is called, Subah ki hawa, lakh ki dawa. That means the morning climate is of lakh rupees medicine. So during waking state, we carry on many activities. Since morning till evening, we carry on many activities. And this results into tiresomeness and weariness. And this tiresomeness and weariness is relieved in a deep sleep because we give up all forgetfully in a deep sleep. So at Brahmi Muhurta, our mind is calm. And even the surrounding environment is also calm. And if we meditate our Atman at this time, so there will be maximum mental peace. So we have to meditate this Atman always to become permanently happy. If we meditate at a Brahmi Muhurta, it forgets by 8 o'clock. And if we meditate at 8 o'clock, it forgets at noon. And if we meditate at noon, it forgets in the evening. And if we meditate at evening, it forgets at midnight. So what to do? What we have to do? So we have to meditate always. This clearly indicates that we have to meditate the Atman always to become permanently happy. So the yogis experience happiness by the mind. The mind partakes the form of the Atman, and the permanent happiness has been experienced. So those who meditate the Atman, they have to take sattvic food. And even that sattvic food has to be taken in limited quantity. And if we take it in excess quantity, so we will be diseased, our body will be diseased. And we have to take the food according to the seasons. For example, in a rainy season and in winter, we have to take hot food. And in summer, we have to take the cold food to maintain the body temperature. So we'll continue about meditation in the next lecture. And by this, I end my talk.